Everyone's serious. Everyone's serious.
Okay, welcome everyone. As you should remember, my name's Sophie and I'm your trainer today doing a class or a workshop on plant recognition as part of our Recognise Plants unit of competency. So what we're going to do today, we're going to recap some of the stuff that we went over in the knowledge session, and then we're going to do some activities where we actually put our knowledge into practice. So as always, I'm sure everyone's aware of the OC health and safety procedures and your emergency evacuation procedures. Toilet is just over there. If you need it, don't hesitate. Throughout the session, please stop if I'm going too fast. There's always opportunity for questions. And I hope we have a great session.
Yeah.
To start with, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land in which we meet today, the Bunurong people, and pay my respects to them past, present and emerging. So what we're going to be doing today, we're going to go through plant classification, and by the end of today you should be able to classify plant specimens that I've got set up over there and here using into the four main families using a dichotomous key. So what we might do, I might just go through, before we start our group ID, I might just go through the four main plant families. And now you have this information also in front of you, but the earliest landforms of plants, which were the earliest plants pretty much to live out of the aquatic environment, were mosses. And mosses are very simple. There's one just here in the middle of the table. Very simple system. They have no true roots or leaves. And they have no what we call vascular system. So they have no transportation system of carrying water and nutrients around. So they can only exist in a small form. They can't actually grow into a bigger form because they need everything they absorb through their skin or their cuticle. They grow in moist shaded areas and they have tiny little short stems and tiny little roots that are called rhizoids. Evolving from mosses, you know, plants are really clever and there's this whole idea of survival of the fittest. So plants started thinking, okay, to survive we need to get a bit bigger. So what the next came along was ferns. And ferns have true roots and stems and leaves. We've got some ferns here. They have spores for reproduction, so they worked out a way to reproduce. And they are vascular plants, so they have an internal system. So they can get much bigger, but they still need water to reproduce, so they can still only exist in a moist, sort of wet environment. Next stage on from ferns comes conifers, or pine trees. Pine trees, again, have a vascular system, true roots, stems and leaves. Now they started getting a little bit more advanced, so they had pine cones enclosing the seeds for reproduction. So then you're starting to get into this more advanced system where seed can be dispersed and the plant can actually survive by actually moving into different spaces. And then we come to the most advanced of the plant families, which are the flowering plants. And these are plants that produce flowers and bear fruit in their seeds. They're the largest and most diverse group of plants in the world. And there are about 300,000 species, and they represent about 80% of all living plants on the planet. So they're pretty amazing. Once you get into flowering plants or angiosperms, you then start to get even more and more diverse. Like there are so many of them. And we'll get into that more when we're doing our ID, but there's two main plant systems in the flowering plants. There's monocots, which is over here, and there's dicots. Sorry, monocots, which are here, and dicots, which are over there. Monocots only have one seed leaf. You can see at the very end here, monocots have a system where all the veins in the leaf are parallel, so they don't actually have a network of veins. They all run in one way. And their flowers are in parts of three. So whenever you see a monocot, it's like an iris, it always has petals in groups of three. Whereas a dicot has a two seed leaf. So, you know, if you've ever seen a sunflower come up when it's shooting, there's always two shoots, two leaves, meaning di. and they have flower parts in more than threes, and they have a network of veins. So the veins just don't run in one direction parallel. There's a whole lot of network, which is not that it's more advanced, but it's actually a better transportation system for nutrients and water around the plant. So last lesson, we looked at the plant kingdom and the dichotomous key of how we classify plants. We won't run through that again, but what I'll do when we're doing our plant ID exercise, I'll pop this up on the wall in case you need to refer to it. And if you're having any issues or just can't quite remember while we're doing our group one, we can refer to this as well. But what I'd like to do while we're standing here, or seated here, is we might look at some of these plants here on the table and see if we can classify them using this very simple dichotomous key. So what type of plant is this? Now obviously you'll need a bit of help with this because we haven't got the whole plant. This is an inside classroom session. Next session, we're actually going to go out into the field and look at plants. So we're looking at the whole plant. Plant ID can be tricky in terms of seasons and the times of the year because, like today I went looking for a ginkgo, which I know is a plant that grows down the road here, but it's deciduous. So it was not in flower or in fruit or in leaf. So I did collect a few little ginkgo leaves, which I've given away one of the answers, but let's just look at this first one here. So this is a shrub, which I'll pass around, and I can tell you, and you should remember from the information we learnt, and from flowering plants bear seeds in their fruits. So if we pass this around and we look at the top of the dichotomous key, what plant is this? Okay, this plant grows seeds or this plant does not grow seeds?
It does grow seeds.
It does grow seeds because it's got a flower. So if it's got a flower, it means it grows seeds. It's got a flower, that's right. So we go into the plant grows seeds. So the next stage on our key from the plant grows seeds is, well, it's already been given away. This is an easy one to start with. The plant grows flowers. The plant does not grow flowers. So does the plant grow flowers?
Yes. It grows flowers.
It grows flowers. Well done. Now, this is actually pretty tricky looking at these leaves.
I wouldn't have picked it.
Monocle?
The leaves look like a network. We probably would need a magnifying glass. The leaves look like parallel. We can tell maybe, you would think monocot because the leaves are straight.
Yeah.
But if you look at the flower, are the flower petals only in groups of threes?
No.
No.
That's right.
So what does that make it?
Dicot.
Dicot. Well done. Okay, let's get the next one. So maybe that one down the very, yeah, that one will do. Either or.
This one? We'll go with this one?
Yeah, we'll go with that one.
Alright.
So let's look at that one. I can tell you that plant does grow seeds. This time of the year it doesn't. So it grows seeds. It also has flowers, which are very rare, so it hardly ever flowers, but it does actually flower. Now let's look at those leaves. It says here, do the leaves look like a highway or do the leaves look like a net?
Definitely highlight.
Definitely highway.
Definitely highway, that's right, it is a monocot. Well done.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, maybe we'll look at
That one?
that one.
Throw a curveball.
Yeah, now this is a bit tricky because, again, time of the year, it doesn't have what we need it to show, but I can tell you that it doesn't produce seeds. So we know it's over to the right-hand side of our dichotomous key. Now, does it have stems and leaves?
Yep.
Yes, it does.
It does. So what is that plant?
It's a fern.
A fern. Well done. Fantastic. Now, let's get that tiny little one there in the middle. Okay, so I can tell you that this plant does not grow seeds. Now, it also doesn't get very big. It doesn't have a stem or true leaves.
Moss.
That's right. A moss or an
What?
algae, a
What?
biophyter.
Bryophyte.
Biophyter. Well done. Well done. Now, let's
So
get.
can I ask a question? Please?
Yeah, sure.
So the moss, that's not leaves, even though the green bits come up, they're not leaves?
They're not leaves. They're not true leaves. So they're too small to be classified as true leaves.
Are they, okay.
So what are they
What are they
classified
classified
as?
as?
Just a stem?
Leaflets.
Leaflets.
Leaflets, and the
There you go.
roots are classified as rhizoids. They don't meet a certain magnification or specification in terms of their meterage. They're
Purely size.
purely size. Yep, and also the fact that they don't have a vascular system, so they don't have any way of transporting nutrients and water throughout their system. So they can only absorb everything they need
Which is through the
Light
leaflets.
and,
through the leaflets and through the rhizoids.
okay.
But the system is so simple compared to a more complex system of a conifer or a
Yeah.
flowering plant. So they'll never get bigger than what you see. They never have any height.
They can't get
They can grow sideways, but they can't actually gain any height because they've got no vascular system to support themselves, to support itself.
And like we were saying last session, they can grow up trees,
Yeah, they can grow up trees and up rocks.
but they're still leaflets, are they?
Are they individual plants or are they all one plant?
They're individual plants. Good question.
So if they're on a tree, as long as they can get what they need from their location.
Yep.
So they can grow in certain trees and different heights.
Yep.
Provided they get what they need.
Provided
Right.
they get what they need. And you would never find them in a dry desert environment because they need that water
In the soil?
in the soil and in the rainfall to actually, they need that immediate moisture to survive.
Last question for me?
Yep.
They were the first ones. How old are they?
They're approximately 1,500 million years old. Whereas the flowering plants, I think, are only about 150 million years old.
Okay.
So plant life on Earth has been around for a long time, but in terms of millions of years, flowering plants haven't been around for that long.
So some of the early dinosaurs with all the ferns.
Ferns, absolutely. And if you've ever watched Jurassic Park, it's full of ferns.
Technically,
It's full of ferns because they try to be true to life in terms of, you
Yeah.
know, the Cretaceous period or the Jurassic period. They try to have the plant life true to the time. Yes.
Can I ask, is this true for sea marine plants as well, this structure?
No, because marine plants have been around for longer, so their timeline is quite different. But it's true in the sense of, and we're getting into sort of uncharted territory here because some marine plants have a different classification because they don't photosynthesize. Some photosynthesize, but some don't.
Right.
Same with algae. Like they don't actually photosynthesize. They use the soil and they feed off other plants. But we could do a whole other lesson on the timeline of marine plants. But marine plants have existed. Their timeline is way before 1,500 million years ago.
Thank you.
Okay, so maybe we'll do this as our last one we'll do together on our dichotomous key. So I can tell you this is a fig tree. I know we've only got the leaf in front of us. So being a fig tree, we know that it
Seeds, flowers.
has flowers, fruit and seeds.
And you can see it's got a network
Well, there we go.
as well.
So what sort of plant is it?
A dicot.
Well done. Fantastic.
Dicot?
Well done.
Dicot or diacot?
Dicot.
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 So I can see that you really know your stuff and you've retained information from the last session. And I think you're pretty ready to do your own ID of the plants that we've got over on the bench. So what we've got, I've got 8 plant samples labelled over there. And in front of you, you'll have a plant ID sheet. I'll put,
Do you want us to go over there or do you want us
yeah, we're not just yet.
Okay, sorry.
I like your keenness,
I've always
but
been-
we're not quite ready. So I'm going to put, as a reminder, the dichotomous key for plant life, which is a lot more detailed. I'll just put it up on the wall so you can go and refer to that if you need to. What I can help you with, I can't, because it's an assessment, I can't tell you the answers, but you can certainly ask me questions. Because we've only got samples, we're not looking at the plants in their garden form. I can say, like, you can ask, does this plant have fruit? Does this plant have flowers? Does this plant grow to a certain size? So you've got the posters up here which have the information about each plant type. We've also got the Plant Kingdom dichotomous key here, which I'll put up just on the wall. And there's 8 plants to ID. Once we've ID'd them, we might go through the answers, but we might leave that for a different time. We might just sit down and we can ask any questions that you might need some help with, and we'll go from there.
So when you say ID, like as in whether it's a dicot or not?
Whether it's, so whether it's a moss, a fern, a conifer, or a flowering plant.
Cool.
You don't. You can have a go of the dicot, monocot at this stage, but it's not necessary for this assessment.
Okay.
It's really just the 4 main plant groups that you need to ID. But don't hesitate to ask questions. You can move around the whole space. Take your time, and I'll let you know when it's time to come back to the table.
Do I need to for this or?
Just put the Plant Kingdom thing up here. Maybe I'll just turn that around so.
Yeah. Is that one?
And when you look at the fern, just make sure you look at the underside of the leaves, because there's a bit of evidence.
This doesn't produce seeds, right?
It does,
It does?
it does. Yeah,
Even though it spreads.
Yeah.
If it's what I think it is.
Yep.
Spreads.
So-
But it does produce seeds.
Let's just ask these questions.
You can ask those questions,
Does
yeah.
it have flower?
No
It
flower?
does have flowers. It does have a very, so a lot of plants have a very small, insignificant flower.
It's the same.
No,
Excellent.
different. I just thought I'd put,
What is it?
no, that's the number 4. I just thought I'd put that there because you can see some evidence.
Number 4.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
No, this one isn't, this one's number 4.
They're both, they're both
Everyone's
number
going to,
4.
I'm going to do a single toe. Right, I've got this one covered.
Presumably no flowers on this one.
No flowers.
We
So,
get,
and
we
what's-
get extra marks for the Latin instead of.
Absolutely.
Oh,
Oh,
that's
no.
cool.
It's got a kilo fed in.
Can you see this one? Here.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
I'm glad you've got this here because I might.
She's going to need the.
Oh, is it three?
Flowers.
No one need any help?
No.
This one's for the one Sam's holding.
Yeah, I
So
should have
it's
said that.
42
It's a different plant, but it's the same family. And I just put the pot plant there as a bit more of a clue.
Right, but then.
Did you say this one doesn't have flowers?
That does have flowers.
There's something in there very cool about
Saying it's a network. Does it
But it's
work?
got this little, what do they call that? These little things on it?
These things here,
Yeah.
they're the spores there. These is just like a growth node here.
Or where the
Cacti.
Yep.
Are they, well, they have flowers.
Yeah, they're flowering.
Don't just write fern. It's a
Okay.
Oh, well, I started with
Dicotyledons.
Flowers.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, finish, miss. The technical name.
Finished.
curious.
That's called a.
Oh, we should have a look, should we?
The heater on, it's getting a bit cold.
Yeah, good idea.
Thank you.
We
should refer
Away from your leg.
I'm just gonna have a.
Then just send a message to your phone.
Well, it's got a highway. Yes, well, it's got a highway. Well, the highways are like in there. Yeah, I'd say that's it.
Hey, so,
Yep.
this one here, number 2,
Yes,
does that have seeds?
it has seeds and flowers.
Seeds and
Yep.
flowers.
Good question. That's a tricky one. That's the curveball.
And which one's the curveball?
This one.
Oh,
Because
yeah,
you hardly-
bamboo, we talked about bamboo.
You hardly see that flowering.
Yeah, I've never seen it.
So if you'd like to classify that into a monocot or dicot, go for it.
It's got to be a highway.
This one?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's got seeds.
Yeah, that was the one I
Yeah,
had most challenging.
Grow seeds. I reckon it's got to be seeds. They've got spikes. So it grows seeds.
Sorry, I've done it.
Is this all the same plant?
No, that's four. Oh, which one's,
Is this?
is that part of, that's part, no, I know this plant.
Is this part of the same plant? So,
That's this one.
So this, that's the dicot.
Oh.
oh, it produces seeds, doesn't it?
No, it doesn't actually, I don't think so. Plant doesn't grow flowers. I reckon it might be, but it's not.
Leaves
Plant
parallel.
has a fan-shaped leaf, no? Plant has a needle-like leaf, no?
So,
Yeah, oh, there's
that's
no.
the question. This one? Flower?
Yes, they're the flowers. Yep. Oh, insignificant, but flowers. True flowers.
I've removed many of those from my garden.
Yeah, they're illegal.
They're illegal.
Yeah.
My previous owner loved them.
No, I put them in thinking because they're so hardy and they're, they're indigenous.
Every time I try and do something, it's
Like, oh yeah, I might take them out.
on this board.
I think I understand.
Oh, that's 4 and that's 4 as well. So I just put that there so you can look at the underside of the leaves.
How's that looking, Sammy?
That's big.
I didn't find any ginkgos. Did anyone find a ginkgo? This one, isn't it? Sorry.
Anyway.
No, it's right.
Ginkgos.
No, me either. Yeah.
Oh, we're going to talk about that now.
I'd be fascinated to know which plants.
Are we going through the answers or?
I don't want people to have to share what they got, but I'll let you know what each one is. Sure. Not everyone's comfortable with sharing their knowledge in a skills session, so just looking from over here, I think number 1 maybe was a bit of a giveaway because what was on the top of it?
Had a flower.
Had a flower, yep. So obviously classified as a flowering plant.
Yeah.
Number 2 was a tricky one because even though it didn't have any flowers or fruit or seeds, I was able to let you know that it does have flowers. So that was a flowering plant as well. And would anyone like to take a guess of the type of flowering plant it was?
Monocot?
Monocot, parallel lanes, or I like the how people describe them as veins on highways. It's a good idea. It's a good thing to look at. And when you're classifying plants, it can be pretty tricky, particularly looking at the network of veins. We had some issues with that on our knowledge session because the veins were sort of in lines, but I knew it was a dicot, but the lines were network, but you actually need a magnifying glass to actually see the network of veins. So number 3 was a fine needle-like leaves, no flowers, but cones, so that was a conifer. Number 4 was a bit tricky because in fact it is a fern, but there's only the smallest amount, because of the time of year it is, there's only the smallest amount of spores present on the underside of the leaves. So it's good, you know, when you're classifying plants, you can look at the actual plant, but it's really also important to do your research and look up plant manuals and look up, you know, botanic gardens are a really good source of information for that because they will tell you the whole form of the plant with its flowers, fruits, seeds, dimensions, habitat, form. Number 5, again tricky. It's got strappy leaves and they are in fact flowers that are next to them, dried out flowers. So that was a flowering plant, monocot or dicot. Does anyone want to take a guess?
I'm thinking monocot.
Monocot, well done. Number 6, similar to number 3. Did everyone get conifer? Well done. And number 7, a bit of a giveaway with the beautiful sage flower. Just an interesting fact, when we delve even more into plant classification and diversity, sage is a salvia, and it's a very big plant family, salvias. And salvias can be classified because if you hold a salvia, the stem is actually square. So it's a really easy way to, if you need to classify herbs or looking at, you know, tests that you're doing, you'll never forget a square stem is always a salvia. So good tip to know. And the last one,
So that was the dicot, yeah?
no true stems or leaves. Doesn't grow very big.
Bryophyte.
Gonna go.
Moss.
Moss or bryophyte. Well done. Well done, guys. And that is pretty much just scratching the surface of the 4 main plant groups. You know, once we get into
100%.
Me too.
well done, well done. We don't need to share our answers. That's information that I'll take and assess. And because it was just the introductory session, once we go out into the garden for the next session, we'll do this again in the garden. And that's when, you know, really with plant ID, you should do it several times a year to actually get a true example of plant ID. And the beauty about plants is that plants are still being discovered. You know, the plant world is so big and, you know, plants are continually evolving to, I suppose, cope with their environment. Like now, today with climate change, plants are, obviously this doesn't happen overnight, but plants can evolve to actually live with different environmental conditions, which just blows my mind. Plants are so clever that they actually work out, you know, it is a bit of survival of the fittest. So they work out, okay, it's like sunflowers literally turn their heads as the sun rotates through the sky, so they get the maximum amount of sunlight as they're growing. Whereas, and seeds, you know, I showed this video the other night, there are these seeds, grass seeds, that have actually evolved into a amazing skill that once the grass seed drops off the grass, it's something to do with when the plant dries out, the grass dries out, and then when it rains, the grass actually moves, and it's like the grass is walking. So a plant's whole, I suppose, purpose in life is to reproduce, to actually keep its population growing so it doesn't die out. So you're going to do that if you find a great spot to live. You know, I think with coconut trees, what they do is they're so slow growing, is a coconut tree it's got such a big seed that it will just drop its seed at the base of the tree. It doesn't need to go anywhere because once its parent plant dies, there's a massive, big, beautiful space for it, and there's a whole lot of light, and that is when a new coconut plant will grow. So they're so smart, they're so clever, such an amazing world, plants. So we've just scratched the surface. Has anyone got any questions about plant classification and diversity?
No, I've got another question.
Yep.
So the evolution of plants, is
Yep.
that faster than the animal kingdom then? So we're looking,
Ooh,
it's
good.
a bit off topic,
No,
not quite in your
um,
wheelhouse, perhaps? I think it's an interesting question.
I think it's a very interesting question. I would take a guess at yes, but it's only a guess based on how plants can adapt and how long plants have been on this earth, and the rate of plant extinction compared to animal extinction probably is less. So I would say plants in some ways
Can evolve first.
can evolve faster.
In terms of that, the fact that they are evolving, could there end up being a new category of plants?
Absolutely, absolutely. Like I was saying the other night, you know, it's amazing that plants are still being discovered, and this could be because plants just have not, people haven't found them yet, but it also could be that because plants are evolving and that plants that didn't exist 100 years ago actually exist today. So the case of the Woolamai pine, you know, that was a ranger hiking through the national park, and he happened to, you know, abseil down into this very, very remote area. So they don't know how long those Woolamai pines have been there. They could have been there. I mean, they're a pine, so we go, okay, well, they've been here for at least 500 million years, because that's when we know that the pine trees or the conifers have evolved. But how long's that actual type of pine been on Earth? It's pretty amazing stuff.
It is amazing stuff.
Any comments or questions before we finish up?
Yeah, I got another one. So, this is good. I like this. So plants carbon dioxide, so they absorb that. Do all of the plant kingdom do that?
Yep.
These?
Yep, even the ones underwater.
So they'll grow bigger if there's more carbon dioxide in general, or not?
Not necessarily.
Do they need carbon dioxide?
Yes.
So they do need it.
So
So how do the plants in underwater get carbon dioxide?
well, there's air, there's oxygen underwater. So how does the fish breathe underwater?
There's carbon dioxide in the water as well.
There's carbon dioxide and there's oxygen in the water.
Right.
Dissolved.
So just like fish have a certain process that when the water moves through their gills, they uptake the oxygen. Plants have different processes, but there's gases that exist in the water. Whereas fungi, obviously, you know, we're going into photosynthesis now and how plants, it's called transpiration or respiration, how plants breathe. Fungi and mushrooms don't photosynthesize, so they don't need that to survive. Fungi actually rely on, they have a whole network of root system that actually latches onto other plants in the soil to actually, they're sort of a bit parasitic where they actually take their nutrients from other plants.
Wow.
That tastes so good.
They're very, very clever. Even, you know, they're crazy clever.
I didn't know that. There you go.
Yeah, if you look up fungi networks and how there's some
Careful.
Make sure you're
how
running
they even talk to each other and say, there's a really healthy tree over here, let's go over here. They're crazy clever. It's amazing.
So do they feed off the tree, but do they impact the tree, or is it really they're so small?
They're so small. But eventually, so if you look at, say, a tree that's died and is just left in the forest, fungi will start growing on that tree and feeding off that tree,
Until it's rotted down.
but it will take a very long time. That tree's going to naturally decompose, and maybe fungi speed up the process, but not a lot. Just a small amount. But we could talk fungi until the cows come home. But we need to finish up the lesson. So thank you very much I hope you enjoyed learning about plant classification. Next session we will go out into the field and actually look at classifying plants out in the environment, which is even more exciting.
Can't wait.
We had a clap. Thank you.
We don't generally usually clap in a TAFE lesson, so thank you.
That was good.
You can just turn the recording off now.